Morning, Larry. You're up early.
Yes. I heard people in the corridor. And is there anything wrong?
Richardson was killed last night, the gravedigger. The tracks lead up to this house.
Footprints?
No, animal tracks, a wolf.
A wolf? Where do you suppose a wolf came from?
Well, he might have escaped from a circus or a zoo.
What is this story about a man turning into a wolf?
You mean the werewolf?
Yes, sir.
Well, it's an old legend. You'll find something like it in the folklore of nearly every nation. The scientific name for it is lycanthropia. It's a variety of schizophrenia.
That's all Greek to me.
Well, it is Greek. It's a technical expression for something very simple. The good and evil in every man's soul. In this case, evil takes the shape of an animal.
I can figure out most anything if you give me electric or tubes and wires, but something I can do with my hands. But these things you can't even touch.
What's the matter with you, Larry?
Oh. Well, nothing, sir. But do you believe in these yarns?
Larry, to some people, life is very simple. They decide that this is good, that is bad. This is wrong, that's right. There's no right and wrong, no good and bad. No shadings and grays, all blacks and whites.
That'd be Paul Montfort.
Exactly. Now, others of us find that good, bad, right, wrong are many-sided, complex things. We try to see every side, but the more we see, the less sure we are. Now, you ask me if I believe a man can become a wolf. If you mean, can he take on the physical characteristics of an animal? No, it's fantastic. However, I do believe that most anything can happen to a man in his own mind.
Hey, Adrenalheads. Welcome back to the show. I'm Mark.
And I'm Ben.
And this episode, we are continuing our Halloween coverage. And with this, we're going to do the Universal Classic, The Wolfman from 1941. And this particular movie was directed by George Wagner. And the tagline for this particular movie for back then was, even a man who is pure in heart and says his prayers by night may become a wolf when the wolfsbane blooms and the autumn moon is bright. All astronomers are amateurs. So
the synopsis of this film: when his brother dies, Larry Talbot, played by Lon Chaney Jr., returns to Wales and reconciles with his father, played by Claude Rains. While there, he visits an antique shop and, hoping to impress Gwen, played by Evelyn Ankers, the attractive shopkeeper, buys a silver walking cane. That same night, he kills a wolf with the cane, only to later learn that he actually killed a man who was played by Bela Lugosi. A gypsy, played by Maria, I can't pronounce her last name, explains that it was her son who was a werewolf that he killed, and that Larry is now one himself.
Awesome. I pulled that from Wikipedia, I think. But, well, with that, we always go into people who we may know within the film. So, Ben, start us off with the first one.
The first one is Lon Chaney Jr., who plays Larry Talbot, or the Wolfman. He was an American actor known for playing Larry Talbot in The Wolfman and its various crossovers. He also played Count Alucard, Dracula spelled backwards, in The Son of Dracula, Frankenstein's monster in The Ghost of Frankenstein from 1942. He was the Mummy in 3 different pictures, and various other roles in many Universal horror films, making him a horror icon for the time. He also portrayed Lenny Small in Of Mice and Men in 1939, and had supporting parts in dozens of mainstream movies, including High Noon, 1952, and Defiant Ones, 1958.
Yep. And son of Lon Chaney, just to let everybody know, who was originally an effects artist himself. So I didn't go into detail with that. But obviously everybody who knows the Wolfman knows who Lon Chaney Jr. is. Next up would be Bela Lugosi. Needs no introduction. He, in this particular movie, plays Bela, and he was a Hungarian-American actor, best remembered for portraying, of all things, Count Dracula in a 1931 horror classic called Dracula. Igor in Son of Frankenstein in 1939, and his roles in many other horror films from 1931 through 1956. Not somebody that is strange to the horror genre for the 30s all the way into the 50s, but is a legendary actor.
Not at all. He's very legendary. I was actually surprised at how short his appearance in this film was, being one of the main characters.
Yeah.
The next person we have is Claude Rains, who played Sir John Talbot. He was a British actor whose career spanned almost 7 decades. After his American film debut as Dr. Jack Griffin in The Invisible Man in 1933, he appeared in The Adventures of Robin Hood in 1938, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington in 1939, this film in 1941, Casablanca in 1942, King's Row in 1942, Notorious in 46, Lawrence of Arabia in 62, and The Greatest Story Ever Told in 65. Quite a diverse career there.
Yeah, well, he's very well known from old Hollywood and the golden age of Hollywood during that time. So his career was very long and broad and had a lot of different casting over the years. I loved it in Lawrence of Arabia and Casablanca too. So I loved his portrayals in those particular movies as well. Next up, Evelyn Ankers, who plays Gwen Conliffe, was a British American actress who often played variations on the role of the cultured young leading lady in the many American horror films during the 40s, most notably The Wolfman, obviously, which we're covering here, opposite Lon Chaney Jr., a frequent screen partner as well for Chaney. Known as the Queen of the Bees, Ankers starred in films including The Wolfman, The Ghost of Frankenstein, Captive Wild Woman, 1943, Son of Dracula, 1943, The Mad Ghoul, 1943, Jungle Woman or Woman, 1944, Weird Woman, 1944, An Invisible Man's Revenge in 1944, and The Frozen Ghost, 1945. She appeared in Hold That Ghost in 1941, Sherlock Holmes and the Voice of Terror in 1942, His Butler Sister in 1943, and The Pearl of Death in 1944. So she was more of what we would call a scream queen for her time, and she would be in these horror variations.
Yeah, she was very well known at that time for her appearances in a lot of these style of movies and Universal Monsters horror in general. Next up, we have Maria O. I'm not going to try to butcher her last name.
Auspinskaya.
Yeah,
I think,
let's go with that. Maria Auspinskaya. She played Maleva.
Mm-hmm.
She was a Russian actress and an acting teacher who achieved success as a stage actress as a young woman in Russia and as an older woman in Hollywood films. In this movie, she portrayed Maleva, an old Romani fortune teller. She played that role in The Wolfman, 1941, Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, 1943, both of which had Lon Chaney Jr. and Bela Lugosi in them. Other films she appeared were The Rains Came, 39, Waterloo Bridge in 40, Beyond Tomorrow in 40, Dance Girl Dance in 40, The Mortal Storm in 40, Dr. Ehrlich's Magic Bullet in 40, and King's Row in 42.
She was more of a character actor, I think, representing literally with her accent and everything else. So in that time period, which is fine. It's, they're pretty much putting her in a position of typecasting, but it worked out. She had a career.
For sure.
Yeah. Well, along with that, we just like to give out little bits of information, even though this movie's been around for years, forever. And it is a classic. It's a legendary film from Universal, and it's a classic Universal horror trope or Universal movie. So I like to give the actors some sort of due or just desserts of people knowing where they could find other films for them. But with that, we're going to move into general thoughts of the movie. And what we talk about within this is, what exposure you had to the film, your experience with it, what you liked about it then. Do you still like it today? Would be something that you would recommend to anybody who hasn't seen it before? Because there's still a generation that's out there that obviously has not seen some of these movies. I've noticed they're also used to seeing all the typical slasher movies that I would have grown up during within the 80s, like with Friday the 13th and The Nightmare on Elm Street, and everybody equates horror with that. Me, I still love the Universal monsters. I think Jerry and I mentioned that when we talked about The Creature from the Black Lagoon, when we covered that last. So, but what was your exposure to this particular film, Ben?
I actually didn't have any. Most of my exposure to the Universal Monster Universe is actually from Halloween Horror Nights, Universal Studios.
Huh.
Some exposure through conventions to the very, very few remaining people who are still doing that. I believe Riku Browning passed away this year.
Yes.
He was one of the last ones that was still doing a lot of shows and touring right up until his death, actually.
Mm-hmm.
But I had never seen this movie before. It was something I always wanted to get around to doing, but every Halloween you have, like you said, your classic, the stuff you grew up with that you always want to rewatch, and I just haven't gotten around to it, and this was a good reason to make me sit down and watch it and actually do it.
Huh.
I was surprised how short this movie is. It's an hour and 10 minutes long.
Mm-hmm.
There is no fluff. This is barely longer than an episode of your favorite TV show, so it gets up and going pretty quick, and that's it. There's no extra stuff in the movie. Despite it being 1941,
mm-hmm.
I watched it on streaming. It looked amazing. It looked very, very good on screen. It's held up well. It didn't look kitschy or bad graphics or special effects or anything. I was very impressed with it. I liked the movie quite a lot.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm surprised about that, but it doesn't surprise me. There are a lot of people that have never seen it before. And it's something to really, I always say, to expose like people who have never seen it, because it is classic. It is classic horror, but it's classic film, in my opinion. I grew to learn to love classic films like this. Like, I got to see Chaplin films during a movie appreciation class when I went back to community college for like a year and a half, just so that way I could get credits. But this was like, oh, I'll take this class. But I got exposed to a lot of movies I never thought I would have ever seen, and Chaplin was one of them. And I never thought I would ever watch a Chaplin film. So it's great that you got to, made you experience it and enjoy it too. And would you say you would suggest this to somebody else who hadn't seen it, or would you?
Absolutely. My wife is a little bit younger than me, and she came in when I was finishing it. I put it on one night and didn't finish it, and finished it the next morning, and she was stuck to it just as much as I was. So I think that kind of opens up it just a little bit of exposure, and you can broaden your horizons a little bit. I think we'll watch a few more of the Universal Monster movies before the spooky season is over.
Awesome. Yeah, it's good for a marathon for the Halloween season. If you think about it, for the month of October, I always recommend it. I actually have a series of the Universal Monsters on DVD. It's like a collection. So you had the Wolfman, you had Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, you had the Invisible Man. I have the Creature from the Black Lagoon. They have 3 movies. So, and then you have the Draculas that are out there, and then Frankenstein's monster, with the Bride of Frankenstein as well. I actually, when I do home theater installations, I actually met somebody that was interested, and she was around my age, but she was like very much into the idea of these classic style horror films. And she shocked me. I'm like, it was like the first time I've ever met somebody like this. So my exposure to it was, I grew up with this stuff. It was always on Sunday afternoon on UPN 9 or Channel 11 TV in New York City. I lived in one of the 5 boroughs in New York for the first 28 years of my life. So it was from a young age. I would always see it around the time of Halloween, and it was something that I just always loved, because as a kid, I was afraid of my own shadow when it came to a lot of things, when it came to horror, especially with modern horror during that time, because like in the 70s, you had to deal with The Exorcist and Amityville and all that good stuff. And that would scare the living poop out of me. And some of the Vincent Price movies during then too, like the House of Wax was one of them, and that was in color. That scared the living daylights out of me as well when my siblings would watch it on TV, and I'd be like, I gotta get out of here. But these movies, like with Frankenstein and stuff, I didn't mind, especially when you get to see the Abbott and Costello meet, the monsters. So it was like meets Frankenstein and Wolfman, and which Lon Chaney Jr. actually did reprise his role for that, as well as Karloff, and you get to see Lugosi as well. So I always thought these were classics. These are something that I always loved. Also, it helped me embrace my love for special effects makeup. And when I was in grade school, I still have it. I have a book. Got it from the library because you did something where you could pick a book to take home and keep. And it was a special effects makeup, and it was very classic for its time from the 70s. But it showed you had to make, like with a paper bag, had to make your own Frankenstein, had Wolfman on the cover, showed you how to put hair or fur on gloves so that way you could have the hairy hands and like for like a mask or something as well. And I just grew up with it, and I always try to recommend it. I think I exposed my nieces to these movies as they were growing up too. My brother did the same too when, they were home during the time of Halloween. So they know what they are. They don't like them nowadays because they grew up with it for such a young age. But me, I still enjoy them, and I like to watch them every once in a while. And I would definitely show it to somebody who's like, oh, you haven't seen this? And you mentioned earlier too, Ben, about Rico Browning. I got to meet Rico several times at conventions. I got to meet him before he passed away, as well as Ben Chapman, who played the creature as well. So I was so grateful for that time because that was my favorite Universal monster. And I got to meet the two guys who played the suit actors, the one that was in the water and one that was on land. Unfortunately, Ben I only got to meet once, but I always wanted to meet these other people too from the classic Universal, but it's so hard because they're so old and they're some of them are long gone. But
yeah, many of them have been dead our whole lifetimes.
Yeah.
But Riku was a genuinely nice guy. Daniel and I, my brother, we would see him at conventions all the time, and I don't know how many things from Riku my brother has, because if his table wasn't busy, he would go over there and buy something anyway, just to keep him afloat. He was a great guy. Super nice.
Yeah, he's very nice, and he loved to sit with his fans and talk about that whenever he could. Very nice and pleasant man. It's so sad that he's no longer with us. He was the last, like you said. But it was awesome. When it comes to this particular movie, like we did with Creature from the Black Lagoon, we have a tendency of talking about our favorite scenes, things that we liked within the movie itself. And those would be our favorite scenes or thoughts about the movie overall. So do you have any particular scenes? They don't have to be in any special order.
Mostly, I just have one note here that the transitions where he's transitioning from man to wolf. I'm a practical effects guy. You were just talking about that. You took the book home from the library.
Yeah.
I like practical special effects in movies. And even if you can tell or it's not quite as good as CG, I'm not a CG fan. Uh-huh. And the fact that they were able to pull that off in 1941, they didn't have anything. They had a camera and their brains. And it was very impressive to see. You could tell kind of how they pulled that off. You could figure it out, but it didn't diminish the effect. It's aged very well. Mm-hmm. If you did that in a movie right now, which you couldn't do because everything's digital now. There's no film anymore unless you have deep pockets, but it would look just as good. They did a fantastic job with that. I was a big fan of the practical transitions. Yeah,
there was I always enjoyed that myself, just because of the practical. I'm a huge practical effects person. I get to hang out and talk. Actually, the last time I saw Tom Savini, I think, was online through a friend of mine, Patricia Tallman. She had had him on her particular podcast or Patreon. And Tom, as we all know, Tom Savini did a lot of special effects. for like Friday the 13th, Dawn and Day of the Dead. He was in From Dusk Till Dawn, things like that. So he always feels the same way. Practical is always best. I always feel the same way. I don't mind CG that much. I just don't like it when a movie is drowned in it. There's a lot of things people could still pull off with CG, but what they had to deal with back then, like you've seen in this particular movie, you could see the fading in or the transition of when he turns from man to wolf. You could see it how they slowed the camera down with the fade in effects, and then that's Lon Chaney putting that makeup on himself, and I always admired and loved that. And that comes from his legacy from his father as being an effects artist. And he still held onto that crown. He wanted to be more of an actor in his films in comparison to his father, who strictly just donned the makeup and just became monsters.
Yeah, and both Lon and his father were very secretive about their techniques. Very little's known about how they pulled a lot of that off, and a lot of that stuff went to the grave with them. It's had to be figured out again over the decades because they didn't share a lot of how they did their makeup and their effects. You had mentioned Tom Savini's. I'm a big fan of his. I was actually supposed to see him at Spooky Empire this month, and he had to cancel. He had a schedule conflict, so I'm hoping I can catch up with him down the road.
Yeah, he's a nice man to talk to, generous. He has his own effects school that could be found in Pennsylvania.
Awesome.
And I dated a girl that went there once.
Oh, that's cool.
Years and years ago when it first started. And people that I know from YouTube, that would be the Grim Life Collective with Michael and Jessica Collins, they did. That's how they gained their fame from their YouTube channel, is they actually did a tour of the effects school. And they got to see the whole thing and how the students, it's an hour-long video. It's pretty cool. And then they got to actually do a full, tour of his house, which is full of all the effects over the years that he has done from every movie that he's held on to. And apparently, when I spoke to Tom about it, I said, do your grandchildren get upset by it? He goes, no, they grew up with this. Nice. They all see it all over the place.
That's awesome. What were your favorite parts of the movie?
For me, my favorite part of the movie, it's funny, you laugh. We talk about effects. We could talk about things that stand out in your mind. I grew up, now I'm like a collector of real weird novelties. I have, if you remember the movie Phantasm, the silver balls that have the little hooks in them and the drill. I have a replica of that I got through Etsy. It was like maybe $100, but it's a metal one. And I always loved that. And I got something like that. Or the fertility statue from Indiana Jones, things like that. So I have one of those. I don't have, you could get some really, really good prop replica lookalikes too that are metal and that stand out, that are very much like them. But there is a cane that if you looked at, Larry has, that he walks around with the wolf on it. That I always wanted. They actually do sell those canes online.
I bet.
And you could probably find them at conventions too. That always stands out because I just loved how it looked. It has the pentagram on it on the side. It's got the little wolf. I love that. And I just love how he tries to use it as like a golf. He's like, oh, it's a good putter. But I loved it because it gave him more of like a character within it. And I just love how Lon Chaney Jr. was able to portray the character of Larry Talbot as well as the Wolfman. That would be one thing to point out that I really enjoyed. The wolf attack, pretty much, would be one. And then any appearance of the Wolfman on screen, especially, you'll see certain classic scenes of him coming around a tree.
Yeah.
And that would be utilized in certain music videos at the time, back in the 80s, like with Iron Maiden with the Number of the Beast song. They'd have with that particular music video, they transition to with Godzilla and stuff like that. But
nice. It's part of the horror makeup show at Universal Studios in Orlando as well. It's a really good show if you get a chance to check it out.
Yeah, I always want to visit Halloween Horror Nights. I would love to do that one time in my lifetime, just to experience that. I know they change it, and yeah, I know people that make it a yearly thing. And
Yeah.
the Universal Monsters is like a big thing where you do see Frankenstein in the park and Wolfman and characters like that.
They had a house this year that was that was monsters, but it was very heavy on Phantom of the Opera this year. It was really well done.
Oh, that's cool. Did you have anything else that you liked or no?
No, I'm good. I really enjoyed the movie though. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, also there's I don't know if you listeners out there have seen it, but there was a remake back in, I'm gonna say, in the early 2010s, and I'm forgetting who did it, but it had Anthony Hopkins in it.
Nice.
But it had practical effects in it. Some, there obviously was CG in it because it was more modern, but it was done very well. And I would recommend that one. So all you have to do is go search. Actually, I might just put it in the show notes. So if you guys want to look at it, you can. We'll do that. But yeah. Yeah, I did enjoy the movie and I just love it. And I just highly recommend it. It still holds up till this time. And I highly recommend it to anybody that's out there. And that's my feeling about the movie, just like with Ben and his thoughts. Was there any favorite quotes from the film that you picked out, or?
I really, for the quotes, I have to go with the tagline you mentioned at the beginning of the episode here. That tagline was actually used in every movie the Wolfman appeared in, and they used a modified version of it in Van Helsing in 2004. So that
yeah,
definitely had some staying power.
Yeah, the Hugh Jackman movie.
Yeah.
Which was entertaining too. I love it for what it is. It's an entertaining film.
What about for you? Do you have any favorite quotes or scenes?
Yeah, it would be there was like a couple of quotes that I have listed here, and one that comes from Larry Talbot on hearing the word lycanthropy, and he goes, "Oh, it's all Greek to me." And his father goes, "Well, it is Greek." It's kind of pointing out. It's kind of a little bit of humor right there. Next one would be Jenny Williams saying, "Even a man who is pure in heart says his prayers by night may become wolf when the wolfbane blows and the autumn moon is bright." And then Larry just turns around after hearing it twice already, goes, "Oh, you know that one too, eh?" So there was a little bit of humor in what they put into here, which is so funny. But that was cool for its time as well, because it is the 40s. But at least it wasn't taking itself way too seriously. But though at times, just like with Frankenstein and everything else, it could be a little bit too extreme. But other than that, yeah, we'll move right into interesting facts or unknown facts about the movie. So do you want to start us off?
Sure. The working title of this movie was Destiny. Riding high on the success of Bela Lugosi's Dracula in 1931, Boris Karloff's Frankenstein in 31, and Claude Rains' Invisible Man in 33, Universal Studios gave audiences a fresh look at another famous monster in 1935 when they released Werewolf of London, which starred Broadway crowd pleaser Henry Hull. Unlike many of the previous horror flicks Universal released, that Werewolf of London tanked at the box office. 6 years later, they were ready to try the werewolf genre one more time. Novelist and screenwriter Kurt Sadamak was tapped to pen a new script. In just 7 weeks' time, he put together a thrilling story about an American named Lawrence Talbot who travels to his family's ancestral home in Wales, where he's bitten by a werewolf. Originally, the movie was titled Destiny, but this was changed to The Wolfman before it premiered.
Well, next up are real-life atrocities helped Kurt Siodmak empathize with the monster. Okay, that's a mouthful of a name. Lawrence Talbot's struggle in The Wolfman was influenced by Siodmak's, I'll say, own experience. A Jewish man of Polish descent, the writer was born in Dresden, Germany on August 10th, 1902. Even as a boy, Siodmak's literary talents were readily apparent. At age 9, his first short story was published by children's magazine. Bowing to his father's wishes, the young man went to earn his degree in engineering and mathematics, but writing always remained his true passion. By the late 1920s, he'd found work as a journalist and emerged as one of Berlin's most prominent authors. Siodmak also made a name for himself in the German film industry until Hitler's Third Reich came to power. The spread of Nazism drove him to France and then the UK finally in 1937. He left Europe altogether. In The Wolfman, there's a degree to which art subtly imitates reality during a 1999 interview with the Writers Guild of America. Siodmak shed some light of the film's dark subtext. I am the Wolfman, he said. I was forced into a fate I didn't want. The parallels are noticeable. As a movie historian, Konstantin Nazar once observed, Siodmak saw this picture as the story of an outsider whose destiny was cursed by forces he could not control.
I can see that. That is pretty cool.
That's a good comparison. I'm wondering if they actually bring that up and when they do writing classes for film. That'd be.
I would hope so. That's a fairly deep connection.
Yeah.
Up next, Bela Lugosi actually wanted to play the main character in this film. He lost the role to Lon Chaney Jr., who, as we all know, his performance in this movie propelled him into stardom. Nevertheless, the former Count Dracula didn't get left out. They cast Bela Lugosi as a mustachioed gypsy fortune teller named Bella. That was kind of a stretch, wasn't it? This character is later revealed to be a werewolf who gets the plot rolling by biting our good friend, Mr. Talbot.
Very true. Now, it's so funny because they say gypsy in this. My friend Penny does a podcast called Still Slaying, a Buffyverse podcast for Podcastica. And I was on there. I had the pleasure of being on one of the episodes for the Halloween one. Which was the second season, I should say, that they covered. And she mentions it, and she states that gypsy is not something, it's kind of like a slander to those people that are out there. So when people talk about like these Romanian people who are drifters, things of that nature, calling them a gypsy is kind of a slander. So it's not PC, but for its time back in the 40s, it was acceptable.
Yeah, it was. I actually, when I was a detective before I got assigned to the role I'm in now, I had a case, and I learned that during that case because it was involving some people and they prefer to be called Roma nowadays.
Oh, that's good to know.
But yeah, it's very interesting. It's a cultural thing. It's not something you would really notice even exists, but it really does. It's not the stereotypical, wagons and fortune tellers. It's a subculture that is there, but in mostly legitimate businesses.
Interesting. Next one.
It's your turn.
Oh, it's my turn?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I forgot. We got into a conversation. That supposedly ancient poem was made up by Siodmak. Even a man who is pure in heart and says his prayers by night may become a wolf when the wolf's bane blooms and the autumn moon is bright. Over the course of the film, the spooky verse is recited on several occasions, usually by a character who claims that it's some sort of ancient rhyme, but the poem was really authored by Siodmak himself. In 1989, he told journalist Tom Weaver, "Nowadays, film historians think it's from German folklore. It isn't. I made it up." Authentic or not, the poem was repeated verbatim in 2004's Van Helsing.
Like we had talked about a few minutes ago.
There you go.
It showed up in all the appearances of the Wolfman, and it sounds good. That's a testament to his work.
Yeah.
The next one, there was some tension between the two leads. Nicknamed Queen of the Bees, Evelyn Ankers appeared in numerous horror films, usually as some type of love interest or damsel in distress. In The Wolfman, she plays Gwen Conliffe, a store owner's daughter who falls for Talbot. Although their characters had great chemistry, Chaney and Ankers didn't always get along behind the scenes. Trouble started brewing when the actress was given Chaney's dressing room. To get even, he subjected her to numerous pranks, none of which she found all that funny. On many occasions, the 6-foot, 220-pound Chaney snuck up behind her in full werewolf makeup. Once she turned around, he would seize her shoulders and growl. He had to hold me or I would have ended up in the rafters, she said later.
Cute. Another problem, a dangerous fog machine. Billowing, man-made fog greatly enhanced the movie's climax. It also turned into a real safety hazard. Toward the end of The Wolfman, Gwen rushes through a murky forest to escape Talbot's lupine form. Just after he grabs her, Talbot is attacked by his own father, Sir John, played by Claude Rains. As they fight, Gwen faints, disappearing beneath a thick blanket of fog. Director George Wagner had instructed anchors to lie still until somebody screamed, "Cut!" However, things didn't go according to plan. After anchors fell, she never heard anyone shout the agreed upon safety word. They started to prepare for Lon to finish the fight scene with Claude Rains. "Well, they forgot me in all the hustle and bustle," she later explained. While she waited, anchors inhaled a copious amount of noxious fumes from the fog machine. Before long, she passed out. "Fortunately, someone in the crew nearly tripped over me and I was saved," she recalled. Wow.
That's crazy. There's no telling what they put in those fog machines in the 1940s. None whatsoever. So it's kind of crazy that happened, and they just left her laying there.
I remember, too, because I played in a lot of bands back in the late 80s all the way up into the early 2000s. And being in a metal band, you'll see a lot of, like, they use lights and fog machines. It's the same fog. They didn't change it until years later because, honestly, that stuff is toxic. You could smell it a mile away.
I used to DJ when I was in high school, like dances and stuff, and we had fog machines, and we cleared a whole auditorium out with that stuff one time. Some people had a bad reaction to it. Yeah, but it wasn't my crowning moment in business, but it's better now. It's still not great, but it's better.
Yeah. Next one.
The monster's design was recycled from a different movie. The creature's appearance was the brainchild of makeup artist Jack Pierce. An unbelievable talent, Pierce is best remembered for creating the signature look of another classic movie monster in Universal's Frankenstein. In 1935, he'd lend his expertise to Werewolf of London. For that film, Pierce created the very lycanthrope facial design that would later be used in The Wolfman. However, he had to go back to the drawing board when Howard Hull refused to wear it. Apparently, the Broadway star complained that he wouldn't be recognized under the thick coat of hair, so a less extreme design was ultimately used instead. Lon Chaney Jr. did not share Hull's reservations. Once the Wolfman came along, Pierce recreated the makeup style that had been cast aside 6 years earlier.
Next up, Chaney's wolf getup took hours to put on. His off-camera transformation from man to beast was a long, tedious, and sometimes agonizing process. Pierce once revealed that the whole ordeal would usually consume 2.5 hours. Wow. "I put all the hair on a little row at a time," he said. This involved quite a long time commitment, as Chaney's werewolf ensemble consisted of a mask, a furry chest plate, and 2 clawed gloves. After the hair had been arranged, Pierce would curl and singe it with, which made the creature look like it had been out in the woods. Removing this material was even more wearisome. "What gets me," Chaney vented, "is after working when I'm all hot and itchy and tired, I still got to sit in that chair for 45 minutes while Pierce just about kills me, ripping off all that stuff he put on me in the morning." In Frankenstein, Boris Karloff took to sleeping with his makeup on in order to skip the next day's application ritual. Chaney considered following suit, but worried about that his eyelids might get stuck together while he dozed. Actually, it's so funny too. Boris Karloff's daughter, Sarah Karloff, talks about that when you see her at conventions as well.
Yeah, there's a lot going on here for an hour-long movie. The next one, a live bear once rampaged through the set. In one deleted scene, Talbot wrestles a 600-pound Ursine. The sequence was shot on a soundstage, wherein the bear spent most of its time chained to a pole. At one point, it broke free and immediately charged toward anchors, who said, "I have never ran so fast in all of my life." Fueled by adrenaline, she bolted up a ladder and into the studio rafters. An electrician who happened to be up there hauled her onto to a platform, while down below, the bear was eventually brought under control by its trainer.
We do get to see a bear, though, in the camp. Because it was part of their kind of like tradition of having animals and everything for that group of people. So, but obviously it got deleted. But we do get to see the bear at some point.
That's awesome.
Chaney's beloved dog makes a cameo appearance. When Bella bites Talbot, he does so in canine form. For that scene, Wagner recruited a German Shepherd named Moose. As it happens, Moose was Chaney's pet. By all accounts, the two were inseparable, and the Wolfman star could often be seen walking the canine around the Universal lots. Tragically, Moose was killed by a car in 1944. Oh, poor dog.
Yeah, that's a bummer.
Yeah.
The movie's release date was met with some controversy. That seems to be a theme. The last movie you and I talked about had a release date controversy as well.
Yeah.
From the get-go, Universal had planned to release The Wolfman in December of 1941. However, the December 7th attack on Pearl Harbor made the studio think twice about their premiere date. With the attack still casting a shadow over the American public, Universal worried that audiences wouldn't find The Wolfman or any other monster picture the least bit frightening. The country had just propelled into World War II, so why would anyone be afraid of a big bad wolf? Nonetheless, Universal stuck to its schedule. The Wolfman was previewed in Hollywood on December 9th, opened nationwide 3 days later. Some critics felt that given the recent events, the studio's decision to unveil a new creature feature was in poor taste. To cite but one example, Variety's review of The Wolfman called it dubious entertainment at this time. And yet, against all expectations, the movie turned into a monster hit, grossing a then spectacular $1 million domestically.
Amazing. Yeah, that's a hit there. It's very, $1 million back in 41 is equal to the $1 billion.
It would be a very successful movie now.
Yeah, exactly. And last up, The Wolfman was Chaney's all-time favorite role. The film's success secured Chaney's place alongside Lugosi, Karloff, and Rains on the Mount Rushmore of horror icons. Over the next few years, he more or less became Universal's go-to guy whenever a new monster role became available. Between 1941 and 49, the rising star played a mummy, the vampiric son of Dracula, and Frankenstein's monster. Still, the role of the Wolfman always held a special place in his heart. Later in life, Chaney wrote, "Of all the characters I've been, I liked Lawrence Talbot. The Wolfman, the best." Like Siadmak, Chaney regarded him as a tragic figure. He never wanted to hurt anyone, noted the actor. During this period of sanity, in between full moons, he begged to be confined and chained, even killed to avoid the horrible consequences of his curse. He was a classic product of misunderstanding. Very, very cool.
That's awesome. This was a great movie to go through. I really enjoyed this one. I hope more people check it out for the Halloween season this year.
Yeah. And as well, we always recommend the other horror films like the Universal. This year we wanted to tap on least 2 Universal and then 1 slasher, possibly. We'll see what happens with the Friday the 13th, the final chapter, when
Good
Jamie
stuff.
Dimmick and I come back. It's interesting to have those. All right. Well, we're at the point in the podcast. So where can listeners hear you, Ben?
They can find me on Two Key Geeks podcast, anywhere you listen to podcasts. And if you like automotive content, No Patience Projects on YouTube.
Awesome.
What about you, Mark?
Me? Well, you not only could hear me here on Adrenaline Cinema Podcast, as always, But you can always hear me on Panels to Pixels podcast. We have separated recently the episodes for Loki and for Gen V. So we're covering Gen V separately because of the extremism that's in the particular episodes on Amazon Prime. Because as you all know, you listeners or if you don't know, it's a continuation of the Boys saga that was on Amazon Prime. So if you know how nasty that show could be and
nice
graphic.
Yes.
So my friend Rob Moda and I are covering that. And as always, Steve Brown and I are covering, of course, Loki season 2. So you could hear those coverages independently independently from each other. So there'll be an episode per week, possibly. We had to double up because Rob had a family thing going on. So we're going to double up episodes 3 and 4, and we'll probably do 5 and 6. You should have episode 2 of Loki by the time this comes out as well. And we'll be moving on to episode 3. Steve and I will be in Massachusetts. Massachusetts, probably going between Salem and Boston with what I like to call a podcaster's retreat with all the other friends of ours and other networks and other podcasts for us all to hang out. You could also hear me on Wilhelm eventually. We'll be covering, I got asked to help cover Monarch, Legacy of Monsters with my friend Ben Beck. So I could put my Godzilla knowledge to use because, as a lot of you listeners know, I'm a huge Godzilla fan. I've gone to G-Con from the 90s all the way until they ended it into early 2000s and just have this love and infatuation of Godzilla. So I have way too many Trendmaster toys and Bandai toys hanging around. So if a woman came over my place, they just look at me as a grown child in their 50s.
You and my brother have that in common. I promise. He is a huge Godzilla guy. So right there with you, and hope that you have a good trip.
Oh, same here. But other than that, we didn't get any feedback because I didn't put anything out really. But I just wanted to give this out to you listeners so you had something for Halloween. It's always fun to listen to some of this stuff every once in a while and let it be a surprise. But for feedback, all you have to do is go to our Facebook page, which would be facebook.com/AdrenalineCinemaPodcast. There you can just find any images when I'm starting to post about the movie or whatever we're going to be covering. Just enter the comments below. And if you want, you could just email us. And you could just send the email straight to AdrenalineCinemaPodcast@gmail.com. Just type out your thoughts. We'll read them on the podcast. Or if you don't feel like typing or doing anything, that you have all these cool new devices out there. There's smart devices, or even on your computer, you record yourself and you could add it as an attachment. As we all know, in the devices in this world of Zoom and everything, you can record yourself. We could be found on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or any podcast player of choice. Preferably on Apple Podcasts. If you could give us a rating and review, 5 stars would be really appreciated. It'd be amazing. As well as you can find us on YouTube, and that's all you have to do is look for Adrenaline Cinema Podcast on YouTube. It's the podcast as you hear it now, but it's another way of listening. They also like a rating or review as well there. And if you subscribe, and then ring the bell to notify you when a lot of people use it as a way to listen or to catch up with the podcast. It's a wonderful world we live in. And that's about it. I just recommend everybody to check out all the other podcasts that are on the Pirate Car Entertainment Network. Watched it in the 80s with Damien when he comes back. And definitely Fantasy Picks Movie Edition, which you could also hear me on occasionally with Rob Moda, Frank Rodriguez, and Adam Gonzalez. So we have fun doing that there. So all you have to do is go to piratecarentertainment.com. So I just want to thank everyone for listening. It's amazing that you guys are doing that. We're getting a lot of hits. So thank you very much for that. And I want to thank Ben for being on.
Thank you for having me.
No problem. This was Adrenaline Cinema Podcast. I'm Mark.
And I'm Ben.
And we'll talk to you guys soon. And have a happy Halloween.